Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there. Hello, and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Dr. Issues.
And I'm Anthony Sitko.
Does that sound a little strange to anyone?
Yeah, that's a little weird.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think it's probably best that you continue to lead the way you usually do, but I just wanted to point out that I'm going to be taking a different role. In other words, you don't have to listen to Dr. Issues expound on these types of topics this time. It's going to be Anthony's turn to be on the hot seat for once.
Yeah, this is going to be a different issue episode in a couple of ways. For starters, I'm not sure if our listeners will be able to tell this, but this is the first time that Doc and I are not recording in the same room together. We are taking all of the precautions needed for social distancing. And as such, Doc is at his house and I am in mine. And so the next few episodes will be recorded remotely. And if you want to listen in live, you can go to our Discord server, which is where we are recording right now. I know Mara has joined us. So hello, Mara. Thanks for swinging in and listening to this as we record it live. If you have a Discord account, you can please go to tinyurl.com/capesdiscord, capital C, capital D, and join the server and engage with the rest of the community. Doc, in fact, just joined today for the recording session. So as I posted in there, now you can spam him with all of your mental health questions. Please don't. I'm sure he is very, very busy dealing with COVID-19 and all of the situations. God bless you, Doc, for continuing to go to work every day. I know this is a very difficult time for many of our medical professionals and mental health professionals. And so for you to continue to go to work every day and frankly put yourself at risk is incredibly brave. And I salute you. And I am proud to call you a friend and a brother.
Thank you very much. I will say that right now, my biggest role, in addition to helping patients, is to help the nursing staff deal with their own exposures and their own fears, because we're all still connected with our families and we know that this is our war. We're the ones on the front lines now. And I'll admit, even I have to say that I'm more on the back lines compared to many other doctors that have to use the personal protective equipment every day. So as always, wash your hands, maintain proper social distancing, and we'll all get through this together. I do have one part where I may end up needing my own therapist for a while, and I'm not saying that sarcastically, because if it ever gets to the point that social distancing isn't as effective as we thought, and we ever get past that threshold of needing to decide who requires certain critical care needs, then I may be the person making those phone calls to families, and I really hope that I never have to do that.
I think we all hope that you don't have to do that. You texted me the other day about the discussion that you had to have from a procedural standpoint. And that is heavy stuff. And I do not envy you for having to even just engage in those kinds of conversations. So,
yeah, well, it's my fault for being on the bioethics committee for one of the hospitals. And by my fault, I mean, they volunteered me years ago. So I've taken up that mantle ever since, and I usually enjoy it because I'm for patient advocacy, and I still will be. It's just, it's going to be advocacy for one person over another. That, oh boy, that is as bad as it sounds. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's move past that into happier news. This is our 75th episode.
Yay!
Which is just, again, and I know I keep saying this, but like, we've been at this a long time and our fans are still here and we're getting new fans. We have a new patron. Tasha is a new mayor level patron. So thank you, Tasha. As soon as I get a hold of the stickers and as soon as I can make it out to a post office, I will send your stickers in the mail. And it's just, like I said, thank you so much for your support. But it's funny that you joined right at the end of March when we're recording this, even though this episode is technically coming out on April 1st. There's no April Fool's joke. But for the month of April, we're pausing taking money from our patrons because Doc and I had a discussion and we felt that at this time of economic uncertainty where a lot of folks are maybe having their hours cut back or they may be getting laid off and stores are closed in a lot of places. I know in New Jersey is the second most heavily hit state after New York. A lot of people are being hurt economically at a time like this. And Doc and I don't do the show for the money, obviously, though it is appreciated. And so we just felt at this time that it wasn't right for us to take money, even though we don't ask for much and our levels are very low. Every dollar that we can help those folks save, our patrons save at a time like this is better spent on the necessities that you all might need. And so we made the call to sort of put a pause on this for at least the month of April. We'll see how things go moving forward once we do get past this. But that's just sort of our little, I don't even want to say good deed, but it was a way for us to help our patrons and our way of saying thank you to give back to them for everything that they've given us.
Yeah, I would say it's common decency, to be honest.
Agreed. Absolutely. I'm with you 100% there. So like I said, Tasha just sort of slipped right in there at the end of March, but we are incredibly grateful, obviously, for all of the patrons that we do have. And we will continue to be putting out the Patreon exclusive content. Doc and I, unfortunately, due to scheduling and a couple of other things, we have not yet gotten around to record the Lock and Key trade paperback review. We will be doing that very, very soon, and we will get that out. And then we were going to be doing New Mutants for our April trade paperback review, but now that the movie is being delayed indefinitely, maybe that'll be for May. I don't really know. Working on it. Next bit of housekeeping is our review read, Dino Gangof1. And Dino is one of the hosts of the Huuuh podcast. It's just a delight to listen to. Dino says, quote, more than a comics podcast, delves deep into superhero psyche. Always a great listen, a new must in my book. So thank you, Dino. And check out the Huuuh podcast. It's HUUUH ? Wherever you find podcasts. So Dino left that review for us on, I believe, Podchaser. And so you can go to Podchaser, or if you listen on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, wherever it is that you listen to us. If you can leave us a rating, please do so. And if you email us a screenshot of your rating along with your address, we will send you a sticker. So as a way of saying thank you for that. And then our recommendation / shout out plug of the week. Doc, this is one of yours, so I'll let you talk about it.
Sure. This is the Happier podcast by Gretchen Rubin. It also features her younger sister, who happens to be a writer, at times featured in the New York Times. Gretchen actually is a legally trained attorney, but she noticed that wasn't really her calling. Sound familiar, Anthony?
I don't know what you're talking about.
But the point is, she noticed that she connected well with people and really loved the idea of studying personalities and basically just how to be a better person. So she's written a few books on the topic, but the podcast itself is an idea for helpful hints and education on how to live a happier life. And she does a great job of it on a weekly basis, and you can find her at every location or every website that you can get any other regular podcast. So I highly recommend it. It's one I personally listen to on a regular basis, and I would like to think that it's helped me be a happier person.
Well, I still think you're a downer and depressed in a funk type person. No, I'm just kidding. So no, I think especially in a time like this that we need a podcast like that. And we certainly need those kinds of people out there in the world helping us all figure out how to be happier people. So now that we got the housekeeping out of the way, we did mention at the top of the show, this is going to be a little different than your standard episodes in that this is Capes in Court and not Capes on the Couch. We will not be discussing mental health. There will be no skit. This is actually going to be an episode where Doc is going to be throwing the questions at me, and I will be sort of answering with my expertise as an attorney. And so I guess it took us 75 episodes, because this is one that we talked about doing very, very early on when we were planning the show. We said, we could do Capes in Court.
Brainstorming.
Yeah. We said we could do a Capes in Court episode, and those could be like a spinoff of Capes on the Couch. And so 75 episodes in, we finally said, well, this seems like a milestone episode. I think it would be a good opportunity for us to pull the trigger on this one. So the topic is how to handle estate planning in a world where death is not permanent. Now, just I know at the top of the show, beginning every episode, we always have Doc's disclaimer that he is not your psychiatrist, and that if you have any major mental health issues, please contact your local mental health provider or crisis hotline, whatever the case may be. Similarly, because I am the expert here, I want to say that all of the opinions that I express on the show are my own, and they do not necessarily reflect completely accurate legal advice. The advice that I do give does not create an attorney-client relationship. And all of the information that I offer is going to be in generalities, because the specific laws, unless otherwise explicitly stated, do vary from state to state. And so I would encourage you, if you have any questions, to contact an attorney in your own home state that will be licensed to handle those particular questions. I am licensed in New Jersey, and even our New Jersey fans that are listening to this podcast, this episode does not establish an attorney-client relationship. And I'm going to be speaking in generalities, because some of the stuff I'm talking about is New Jersey-based. Some of the stuff I'm talking about is New York-based. There's a couple of states that have differing laws based on the issues that will be brought up. So everything I'm saying is for informational purposes only. But again, I encourage you all, if you have particular questions, please seek out a licensed attorney in your state, in your area, to answer these very particular questions. And I expressly disclaim any and all liability or responsibility for any damages, direct incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, reliance on, or inability to use this podcast or the information presented in this podcast. I just want to put that blanket disclaimer out there. And I guess having said all of that, this is weird. Doc,
Yeah.
I'll let you take over.
Sure. No problem. All right. So I'm just going to make this random statement, because I'll admit, while this is not my area either, I just want to point out that estate planning, when people sometimes hear that, their brains shut off. Estate planning is not for rich people. Well, it can be. It also involves pretty much anything that happens with what you want when you die. So that's why this is going to be relevant to everyone. Of course, in comic books, we've had plenty of examples where people have, let's just say, had bad things happen to them and they're no longer around. So the exact examples of death include Jean Grey, Superman, Wolverine. I know Batman's disappeared in time, Hal Jordan. I mean, the number of...
Captain America.
Yeah. We could
Moon
probably
Knight,
just...
the death and resurrection was literally part of his origin story.
Yeah, that's true. So we have plenty of examples to cull from, but the point is they've quote unquote died and somehow returned back to life. In addition to that, you can just think of society as a whole, where non-powered individuals have come back from the dead as a result of the actions of heroes. At this point, the best example we have was in cinema in terms of Avengers Endgame, the whole fallout from the snap, and we get a good glimpse into that in Spider-Man Far From Home. So I think at this point, everybody realizes that's pretty awkward. So, there's so many things that besides the person, who of course is the most important part, what about their stuff? So we're talking finances, personal effects, the things that people even have of their memories, different items. So I guess the thing that pops to my mind is like, what are things that we can do about all of this? It just seems like it's way over any one person's head. So I'm definitely going to leave that part to you.
Well, thank you. I do want to add one thing before I get into this. As an attorney who has focused primarily on estate planning, wills, trusts, et cetera, for the better part of 10 years at this point, one of the things that I always tell my clients is that an estate plan is not just about your death. It is about legacy. And I explain to clients all the time that we have homeowners insurance, we have car insurance, we have health insurance. We have so many insurances on these items and these things that we have with us while we are living. But one of the things that we also have while we are living is our legacy. And that is what we leave behind, both the physical, the personal effects, as well as financial documentation and finances, and just your memories. Again, as you said, memories of the person who has passed on. And so what I like to use when I'm explaining estate planning to people is I tell them that an estate plan is legacy insurance. That when you are crafting an estate plan, you are creating insurance for how you want to be remembered when you are no longer there to create your legacy. Because as soon as you're dead, that's it. You are now a memory in the minds and the lives of everyone who knew you. And so it can be very powerful stuff to put it that way. And so what I always explain to folks is your estate plan gives you the opportunity to have a say in how your legacy goes on. Who lives, who dies, who tells your story. I know Doc is big on Hamilton.
You beat me to it.
I know. We're not in the same room, but I can see your face. I know how your brain works.
Yep.
Who lives, who dies, who tells your story. That is legacy insurance. And so whether it's the will, and by the way, an estate plan is not just a will. It certainly should include a will, but it also can include...
It has to include a way?
Where there's a will, there's a way, yes. It also may include a healthcare proxy, an advanced healthcare directive, any number of documents and structures set up to help you dictate what you want your legacy to be. And if you want to donate it all to charity, or you want to give some to your children, some to your grandchildren, or whether you want to leave nothing to anyone and you want to have, you want to spend it all before you die, all of these things are entirely up to the desire of the testator. But an estate plan done properly is legacy insurance. So when I'm sitting down with a client and I'm crafting that estate plan, that's my driving goal. And that's what I'm putting on them. And I always explain to people, your estate plan is your fingerprint. Everybody's is unique to them and their specific needs. A lot of the language may be boilerplate. Some of the things may be very similar, but ultimately everything comes down to the individual who is the individual testator. And so there's a couple of terms that I'm going to use. I'm going to try not to bog down too much in legalese, but one of the terms that I will be using is testator, and that is the person who is creating the will. They're the testator. And so the estate plan is unique to that particular testator, and it is their legacy that I am trying to ensure. So now that I got some of that broad overview explanation out of the way, how do you handle estate planning in a world where death is not permanent? Well, this is a concept that we in this world obviously don't have, though there are some potential corollaries, and I'm going to get into the real life stuff in a little bit, but I'm going to structure this as close as I can to the way that we do some of our normal episodes, in that I'm going to start off focusing on the in-universe and then delve into the out-of-universe. So in-universe, starting off, as Doc said, I mean, basically everybody's died at some point, and they almost all come back except for Uncle Ben and, Thomas and Martha Wayne for the most part.
Yeah.
So what happens to their stuff when they pass? Well, there are a number of tools that can be used in the real world as sort of out of universe, that I can apply to in universe. And the first one that pops into my mind is a trust. And what is a trust? A trust is a legal fiction, so to speak. Think of it as a lockbox in essence. And the testator gets to determine what goes into that box, who has access to that box, and where the items in that box go. That's the broadest general term or explanation that I can provide for a trust, because there are many different types of trusts. You have revocable versus irrevocable. You have inter vivos or living. You have testamentary. There are many different types of trusts. So what I would say, if I were Jean Grey's attorney, for example, one of the things I would have Jean Grey establish is a trust for her personal effects, for her items, and for anything else that she deems necessary to be dealt with in the event of her passing, which seems to be a recurring thing, at least with Jean Grey.
Yeah. So I apologize. I'm just going to briefly interrupt because I have to take advantage of this opportunity. So would she be able to get Scott in there? Because the description you gave would mean that he's a dick in a box.
Oh. I walked right into that one.
Yep.
I did walk right into that one. Okay. Well, thank you for completely derailing my legitimate and serious discussion that I was having there.
Isn't it amazing how that can really throw off your original point?
Is this what you go through on a weekly basis? Because I don't think I care for this.
Every single time. Yeah.
I don't think I care for this. So I guess now that the shoe's on the other foot, I'll have to be a little more mindful and respectful. Nah. So you really did throw me there. So for a character with powers, I would say that their best bet would be to set up a trust. And this would be what we call an inter vivos trust or a living trust. And this is something that is established while they are alive. One of the benefits of a living trust is that items in a trust pass what we call intestate, which means outside of the will. And so items that are dictated in a will have to go through the probate process. There's a very clear setup and a very defined process for how those items are bequeathed to the individuals in a will. You have to go through, as I said, you have to go through probate, you have to go through all the steps, and then the people get what the testator wishes them to have. Things that pass intestate, like in a trust, do not have to go through that process. Once the person dies, that's it, you get it. End of story. So there are clear benefits to that. Some of the cons involve taxation. There are recurring fees that have to be done because the trusts have to be held accountable while they are operating. And so Jean would have to pay an annual fee for the trustee to oversee all of her items and ensure that while she is living, that these items are maintained, that they are, now again, whatever her assets may be, that whether they're financial or otherwise, that they are kept for the use of whatever purpose she deems worthy of establishing the trust. Upon her death, and again, I'm trying to draw the corollary as best I can to the in-universe. even though we don't really have the tools necessary for this, because these tools are typically only used once.
Mhm.
For a situation where death is not permanent, there would have to be legislation passed regarding resurrection. And this is something that also sort of appeals to me from a political standpoint, because you would have to draft the laws and they would have to be very clear on what constitutes a resurrection. Is it a resurrection or is it a clone whose memories have been implanted into the new clone? You know, because that, from my perspective, from a legal perspective, that's two different people.
Boy.
One is resurrected. The other is a technically new person. So now what do you do with the assets? Madeline Pryor would not have access to Jean Grey's assets, even though Madeline Pryor is a clone of Jean Grey with memories implanted and so on and so forth. Madeline Pryor would not have the right, the legal claim to Jean Grey's assets.
Oh, boy.
Versus somebody like, let's say, Captain America. When Captain America was killed, and it turns out that he was actually time displaced or whatever it was that he was hit with that funky bullet.
Yeah.
When he returns, he is the original Steve Rogers. Now, whatever items were placed in trust for Steve Rogers, he would have the right to, because he is the original individual.
Okay. I'm just going to briefly interrupt, and it's not for a joke. It's a legitimate question. So
Go ahead.
when the trust is initiated after the person's initial death, you already said it passes through probate. I mean, it doesn't have to go through probate. I know for a fact that probate can be a very long process in the legal system.
It can be.
So, right. I know it doesn't have to be, but I'm just thinking timeline-wise, whether or not it's in a trust or it goes through probate. Let's say Steve Rogers' items or money or whatever was already dispersed, but now he's back. How does he lay claim then to those items?
Well, I'm going to touch on that a little bit when we get to the real life legality, because there is something similar, though obviously not directly applicable, when we talk about declared death in absentia. So I'll get into that. And it's just sort of a little teaser for what we'll get into after the break, when we get into the real life legality and some of the items there. But to answer your question, that again would be dependent upon the laws passed regarding resurrection. Now, this may be, just me talking. And so it would be a very niche audience, but I would love to see a comic book storyline delve into these sort of legal issues and these sort of policy issues and questions. What happens to their stuff when they die? How long do they have? Again, is it a situation where there's a distinction between the original and, resurrected person versus a clone? How do you test for that? Also, is there a distinction between powered individuals and non-powered individuals? Because you're obviously going to have people that may be caught in the blast radius of a superhero fight. We'll look at Civil War, the Stanford incident that killed thousands or hundreds of people when the New Warriors got into a big fight. Say that there is Doctor Strange reverses time, or Superman flies really fast around the world and everything goes backwards for a moment, and these people are resurrected. Now, your average non-powered individual, your non-meta-human, whatever term you want to use, they're not thinking about this sort of thing, because for them, for your average person, death is permanent. Superheroes, powered individuals, heaven is a revolving door for them. For you or me, if we lived in universe and we died, that's it. There's a 1 in a billion shot we're coming back, and it would have to be a universe-wide resurrection or universe-wide reversal of the incident that caused our death, much like the snap,
right?
Where you've got Thanos snapping half of all people out of existence, and then 5 years later, then the Hulk manages to snap his fingers and brings everybody back. Spoilers for Endgame, I apologize, but at this point, it's the #1 movie of all time. Everybody's seen it. Everybody knows the story.
Yep.
all of those people, 5 years went by. The people who survived, they moved on. They somehow managed to find a way to move past the deaths of the people who were snapped away. And now they're back. So what happens to their stuff? What happens to, say, a couple? Say Hawkeye remarried.
Yep.
Say Clint Barton got remarried after his whole family was dusted away. Now what happens? Now that his wife is back, what happens to that marriage? What happens to that sort of thing? These are policy questions that have never, at least as far as I can tell, never really been thoroughly examined in a comic book. I would love to see a comic delve into the ramifications of that. I think Charles Soule, as an attorney, would be prime on something like this. But any writer that does their research, I think, would have so much to work with because there are so many examples to pull from that it would, again, I don't know how much of our audience would be interested in that. I don't know how much of the comic book audience in general would be interested in reading something like that. But I would read that up, every issue in a heartbeat, because that to me, I think, is one of those questions that you never really think about until it's posed to you. What happens to their stuff? How do you do that? And so to get back to the point of this long rambling thing, I think the best option for these heroes is to create revocable living trusts with a trustee that is a very trusted individual, sidekick, best friend, spouse, what have you. And I would also say that it would probably be smart that the trustee not be someone in the superhero biz.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I would think you need someone that isn't going to be as at risk for the exact same event that leads the person to die to, be right there side by side. That
Absolutely.
Sounds like,
absolutely.
Yeah,
and
that's
you would want
sense.
it. Yeah. And I mean, even the trusts that I set up, I always make sure that my clients have a backup trustee. And in some cases, maybe even a backup to the backup.
Yeah.
Because it may just be a situation where, the trustees are maybe their parents or a spouse or what have you. And in the event that a trustee is unable or unwilling to fulfill that role, you need to have somebody there who's able to step up and do the job. So for these heroes, I would definitely advocate creating a revocable living trust. And so I know I just threw out the revocable versus irrevocable. Revocable is sort of exactly what the name implies. It can be amended or revoked by the grantor after it is created. And an irrevocable trust cannot be amended or revoked by the grantor after it is created. And a revocable trust becomes irrevocable upon the grantor's death, since the grantor is no longer able to change or revoke the trust. But again, if we're talking in universe, there would have to be a law that maybe a certain amount of time would have to pass for a revocable trust to become an irrevocable trust after the grantor's death, because you have to allow for that opportunity for resurrection or reversal or what have you. And again, what would the requirements be to ensure that it is the individual being resurrected and not a clone or not, a twin, or what have you. So there would have to be some testing. And again, this would be in universe. And that's at that point, I think, outside my realm of expertise or ability to make that call. But there would have to be a policy set up in place, and there would have to be legislation established that would dictate how all that would go forward.
Right. That makes sense to me. I could think of one incredibly potentially complex situation. Someone like Ra's al Ghul, who clearly cares about legacy, who has direct biological descendants, who has a complicated relationship with someone that he would consider to be his heir, in addition to passing it along, let's say from Talia and Bruce to Damien to I could see things like that getting complicated because on one hand, you're basically talking about an aristocrat who has a large estate who would be able to pass it on to whoever he chose at any given point. If it's a revocable trust, fine. He can pick and choose when and how he decides who gets what, depending on what recent battles have happened and how his plans are foiled. But also, I'm thinking to myself, what about those times where he actually is either on death's door or he actually does get killed and shows up in some other format and says, oh, well, by the way, that whole revocable trust thing, by the way, I don't think that original race has claim to it. So I could see this getting like layered upon layered upon layered and just being tied up in court for years if anyone wanted to try and enforce this stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Somebody like Raish, who has a vast estate and lays claim to assets that could potentially be immeasurable, would definitely be a very interesting case. Frankly, I would love to be Raish's attorney because I'd be making bank.
Collect the fees.
Exactly. I would make so much money representing Ra's al Ghul. Of course, I'd have to lose my soul in the process because I'd be representing an absolute scum of a person. But I digress. These are all questions that I can sit here and hypothesize, but unless I know in universe what state I'm in, what the laws are, it's very difficult for me to suggest what some of the options would be outside of some very vague and general statements. Like I said, a revocable living trust that has a time delay on it before it becomes irrevocable with a trustee who is not involved in the superhero biz, and that you can ensure would be the person who is responsible for carrying out your wishes and carrying that along, maybe holding it until you get back. It's almost like a superhero pawn shop in a sense. But no, that's an insult to trusts and the legal documentation. But the sort of the situation where you have somebody holding it for you until you get back, but then you have something like Jean Grey's Phoenix Force, or the powers. Now, this is something that obviously can't be the powers can't be bequeathed to somebody. But now, what about Captain America's shield?
Right.
Who gets the shield while Steve is dead? While Steve is gone. And who has the authority to make that claim? Is it Steve Rogers or is it the U.S. government? And frankly, I think that's one of the topics that is going to be explored in the Falcon and Winter Soldier TV show, is the whole notion that now that Steve is not Captain America anymore, the government has selected a new Captain America, and it's not Sam.
Right.
Even though Steve is the one who gave Sam the shield and said, this is yours, you're the new Captain America, the government says, no. We created Captain America. We're going to create a new one, and it's John Walker. That again, who has the legal right to make that claim? Does a hero have the right to pass along their personal effects if the personal effects include bequeathing powers? Does Hal Jordan have the right to give his Green Lantern ring to whoever he wants? Or is it the ring? Or does the ring make the call? Which, spoiler, that we all know the ring makes the call. But does Hal Jordan have a legal right to say, no, I want the ring to go to this individual? Are you subverting the agency of whatever sentience the ring itself has? I mean, that's frankly another topic for another time.
Yeah.
But these are the sort of the sticky wickets that you can really get into when you're dealing with this sort of thing. And we can really get into the weeds if we really, really wanted to, but I don't know that we have the time for it. And I don't know that I have the expertise to answer all those questions.
Right. And I'm going to ask a selfish question as a physician. I'm thinking of, for example, you mentioned early on as part of estate planning and advance directive or living will. To put it in layperson's terms, and I'm sorry to be so flippant about this, that's not really my intention, but someone that you trust that determines when they pull the plug, because that's the way people like to call it. Imagine you're in that situation, but for whatever reason, let's use the snap again. That person wasn't quite dead, but you knew they were going to be terminal. And so you made that decision and they flatline, but then for some reason they come back. That person was deemed capable of making that decision. Now that the person is back, is that still their legal obligation? I always wondered about that sort of thing. And I know you can't get into detail about it, but just figured I'd throw it out there.
So I have it right. You're talking about somebody who was basically on life support and the plug was pulled, but then they continued to live and they recovered. Is that the question that you're asking?
I would say when you put it that way, it has a clear answer. But my point was, let's say we see on the EEG, while the doctor is doing all of their assessment about whether or not this person is officially dead, the doctor would make that call and say, yeah, I think we're at the point where we've established brain death. But then for whatever reason, a decision outside of ourselves. So let's not even go, I know I mentioned the snap, but let's just say it's someone with superpowers and they actually do find a way to resurrect this person. I'm wondering, does that person that made the decision that they were going to die, is that still in play?
Well, I think that would be more akin to a real life legality type question. And so we can get into that in a little bit. But I want to take a break just for a moment so we can plug a couple of shows. But when we come back, we're going to get into some of the real life applications of these questions and some of the tools that are used and the situations that could potentially be faced by real people in our universe. So hold on and stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Do you love movies and psychology?
Do you want to know what it would be like if Batman was in your therapy office?
Listen to our podcast, Popcorn Psychology. 3 therapists dissect blockbuster movies, available everywhere you find podcasts.
Hi, I'm Linda.
And I'm Jane.
And we have a brand new podcast called Bedknobs and Broomflicks, where we talk about witches of the entertainment world. From the horror movies Warlock, Suspiria, The Witch, and The Blair Witch Project,
to the more comedic or whimsical, such as Harry Potter, Hocus Pocus, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, and The Blair Witch Project.
No movie, TV show, or book is off limits.
All witches, man witches, sorry warlocks, we're not calling you that, witches brews, witches of history, familiars, and witch-like activity will be discussed as we laugh and have fun talking about the wonderful world of witches.
So join us every other week for some fun witchy talk.
All witches welcome.
Hi, this is Al Ewing, and you're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back for this special episode of Capes on the Couch, aka Capes in Court. And so we just spent a lot of time discussing some of the options for powered individuals, superheroes, even potentially non-powered individuals. What tools do they have in a world where death is not permanent? And by the way, I'm sorry, because Doc, you're the one supposed to be leading this and I'm supposed to be answering the questions. I'm just so used to...
Yeah. No, I understand. It's not even that. It's more that I know I can't just go completely off the rails with questions. This is the type of stuff that you definitely have a much better handle on than I would, even as a layperson. So I'm definitely deferring to you on a lot of things, No,
it's just more the idea that you're leading the discussion.
Right. But I will say this. There's one thing, though, that you've mentioned multiple times, even to my off-the-cuff questions, and that's the idea of declared death in absentia. So you definitely have my interest piqued. I really want to hear about this because I'll admit, I kind of get the idea from the name, but I really want the details. What on earth does that mean? Because apparently this is a real-life thing.
Yeah, so declared death in absentia, also referred to as a legal presumption of death. And this is essentially where you are stating that someone has died, even though you do not have direct proof of the person's death. You cannot find remains. There is no corpse. There is no skeleton. There's no nothing. And this is almost always done when a person has been missing for an extended period of time and there is no evidence that the person is still alive. Or if you have a strong circumstance that the person has died, you don't necessarily have to wait an extended period of time. I do know that one of the key examples of this was after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. There was an emergency declaration for the thousands of individuals that were inside the World Trade Center when it fell, that there was not going to be, it was going to potentially be weeks, months to find bodies, if at all. But if there was evidence that a person was in the towers, they were on the 50th floor, the 80 whatever floor, when the towers went down, they were going to go ahead and legally claim them dead, death in absentia. And so essentially what that means is you're declaring somebody dead without there being a physical body. And so there are laws in the U.S. that are very clear on each state has their own standard on how long a person must be missing in order to declare them dead. And there are additional criteria. You have to have been missing. It's usually 7 years. Typically, it's 7 years they have to have been missing. Their absence must be inexplicable. It has to be continuous. There's no communication with the people who are most likely to hear from them. And there must have been a diligent search for the person or inquiry into their whereabouts. And if after 7 years that you do not hear from this person, then their spouse, children, whatever, can file a petition to have them declared legally dead. So what ends up happening is that there's a court proceeding and all these, it's a very lengthy, drawn out process. And then at the end of it, a person is declared dead. And then their estate, such as it is probated. Now, in the overwhelming majority of situations, the person who is declared legally dead is in fact actually dead and may have gone missing. There may have been a plane crash. They may have gone hiking without telling anybody. You know, the 127 hours guy, he may have, worst case scenario, he may have never been found after being pinned under the rock. Was it Into the Wild, I think?
Oh, my goodness. You got it. Yeah, that's...
Yeah.
Oh, man, I don't want to think about that stuff. Amelia Earhart, of course. Although they
Glenn
said they
Miller.
may have found something. Yeah.
Yeah, Glenn Miller. I mean, there are so many people who were presumed dead, but their body was never found. So what you end up with, as I said, in the overwhelming majority of situations, their body is never found and they are in fact dead. What does happen in very rare circumstances, though, is somebody actually just, they leave and they do such a good job of hiding that they can't be found. They change their name or they go under a different name. They move to another country, this, that, or the other. And then they are found many, many years later. And then what happens to their stuff? And so then if that is the case, you do have a situation where now they have a legal right to come back and say, in theory, I want some of my stuff back. There was an individual named John Burney who disappeared and he was declared dead. He went missing because his company went bankrupt and he was largely responsible for mismanaging some funds. And as a result, he sort of skipped town and didn't tell anybody. So 6 years later, he was found alive when he returned home to visit his father. So his insurance company had filed suit against the beneficiaries of his life insurance policy. And his wife and business partners received all that money from his life insurance policy. The court said, you don't have to return the money because you were not responsible for his actions.
Okay.
John Burney, however, ended up having to pay restitution for that because he defrauded the insurance company. And so they paid based on his death when he wasn't actually dead.
Wow.
So that's just one scenario.
Yeah. I was going to say, when you lead with a setup like that, it sounds like, at least for reality purposes, many of these cases would be more along the lines of fugitives, like people that clearly have a reason to have the world think they're dead or go into hiding. And then later on, for one circumstance or another, it's discovered that they're still alive. But I could imagine, then, as you already pointed out, then there's a greater likelihood that they're simply going to end up with negative consequences from the fact that they're still alive, as opposed to, quote unquote, trying to reap benefits from it. So that's an interesting point. I hadn't.
Well, there is a case now. There is a case, a woman named Brenda Heist. She was presumed dead for several years. 10 years after she was declared dead, she popped up. She had been living on the street. She was essentially homeless. She had no idea she had been declared dead. Now, I also can't imagine, I don't know all the particulars. I can't imagine necessarily that there was a large estate, though there could have been. I don't know, and I'm not going to speculate, but she had no idea. So it wasn't a situation where she was trying to perpetuate any fraud. She'd been living on the streets and they were looking for her. But as you can well imagine, it can be fairly difficult to locate someone who is living a destitute life. And if they are living on the streets, they, vagrant, whatever term you want to use for it, it can be very hard to track them down, because if they have no known permanent address, they're out in the wind somewhere. One would imagine there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people living like this every day in our world, in our country alone, in the United States alone. There are
absolutely.
Thousands. There are thousands of homeless people, hundreds of thousands of homeless people, I would wager.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If they were to just suddenly go missing and then become homeless for an extended period of time, they may be declared dead. And it's not out of any attempt to defraud anybody. It's not like the John Burney case where he was just trying to run away from his problems. It could just be that this is what happens, but they end up being declared dead. Yeah. And then what happens to their stuff, so to speak, so whatever that estate may be. Yeah. What are they entitled to, if anything?
Yeah. Believe it or not, we encounter this, I would say, I don't know, every few months on the psychiatric side when it comes to people in the hospital or in the emergency room, usually from other states. As you said, predominantly homeless or just traveling, like just vagrants. And we have to piece together some parts of the puzzle. Usually they'll have some form of ID that will help out. Sometimes they don't. We'll be lucky if a person has a cell phone. At this point, that's one of the greatest tools, because then we can get potential contacts, and sometimes it's cold calling with the permission of the patient. And I will say I have not encountered a case where it was to the point that the person had been declared dead because they were missing for so long, but it has happened that family members have been shocked about where the person was located and what the plan was. And sometimes that's a positive thing, and we're able to reunite them with people that care. And sometimes it's more that the person left and doesn't want to be found, so they don't care about
exactly
what was going on. So so I can't say that I know nothing about it. I'll admit I hadn't ever thought about it through the lens that you've described, and that's really refreshing for me to have that part of it also now in my lexicon, to be able to discuss with people if it comes up the next time. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So now, for example, and I'm not going to go necessarily state by state, but Nevada, a missing person has a year after legal proceedings to veto the entire thing and get their money and property back. Even if they were declared dead in absentia, you still have a year to file before you no longer have any claim to your former assets. Because at that point, it's been, I guess, 8+ years. And they go, you have not exercised your claim to these assets. And as a matter of public policy, it is our belief that these assets need to be circulated through regular commerce, whatever the case may be. And so it is our declaration as a matter of policy that you no longer have claim to them.
Yeah.
In Pennsylvania, if you are laying claim to an estate for death in absentia, you have to secure a refunding bond before they will distribute any of the assets. So
refunding bond? What does that mean?
A refunding bond. Essentially, before the property is distributed, you have to put up a bond, much like a bail bond.
Almost like a bail bond?
Exactly.
Oh, my
like a bail bond.
goodness. Okay.
So if the person comes back and somebody else has the property, they have to give it back. And if they can't, then the bonding company has to provide the restitution.
Interesting. Right now, I'm not going to lie. All I could think of is bring out your dead. Bring out your dead. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about here.
No, I know. So again, it varies state to state. So what I would say then also for the real life legality is any property that is held in trust can, in theory, depending on the terms of the trust, depending on the type of the trust, and depending on who the trustee is, that those assets could still be there. Now, if the property was placed in a trust, and let's just say for the sake of argument, we're talking money.
Mm-hmm.
So you place $1 million in a revocable trust while you're still alive. And again, I just want to reiterate, the situation I'm describing is purely hypothetical. And some of the stuff I'm not 100% certain on, but based on my understanding, this is how I believe it to work. You place $1 million in a trust and you say, this is for the benefit of my family, et cetera, myself included. This is for the benefit of, me and my wife and my children to help pay for clothing, housing, et cetera, the school needs, whatever the case may be. The grantor, the person who created the trust, then goes missing, what have you. They go flitting off to another country. They're never heard from again for an extended period of time. They're declared dead in absentia. Those assets in the trust still remain within the trust because they are intestate. They pass outside of the probate process. And so in theory, the trustee is still continuing to disperse the assets of the trust to the wife and the children, what have you. Mm-hmm. In theory, and again, I would have to really do a deep dive into case law on this. If they are not, in fact, dead, and if they return after being declared dead in absentia, I wonder if they would have a claim to those assets because they passed intestate. They're still alive and they can say, they may not have a claim to the assets, but they have a right to the benefit of the assets for their clothing and housing and shelter, what have you, because they're not actually dead anymore. That would depend on the terms of the trust document, but I would be very curious to see if, and I would really have to go deep into Westlaw or LexisNexis, neither of which I have a subscription for. But I would, again, this is my own interest. If anywhere in our 50 states or, maybe the UK, if there is a case where that happened and then they were able to say, I wish to receive the benefit of the assets because they were intestate. And so they were placed into the trust prior to my declared death, prior to my disappearance. And so they've continued to exist outside of all of this. And now I'm back. Do I get to reinsert myself into the benefit of those assets? I'd be very curious to read case law on that. And that may be something that I have to do some digging on in my spare time.
Right.
Because the hypothetical just came to me.
No, I understand your point. Believe it or not, I don't know if you remember the Vince McMahon death storyline in WWE.
The one that was cut short because of the unfortunate timing of the whole Chris Benoit situation.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, yeah, well, I'm just saying that to me would have been the ultimate case study if they had been able to continue that type of storyline. Just how on earth do you manage to go from that? Imagine Stephanie and Shane fighting over things, and then out of nowhere, Vinnie Mac shows right back up with that strut saying, I'm alive. So, wow. Now that really makes me wonder.
Yeah, there's a lot there. And like I said, that's just really the tip of the iceberg. I have to say that my practice historically has been far less exciting than that. I do not have any clients, nor do I have any history of dealing with anything of that sort. The closest, most scandalous stuff I was dealing with was a woman who has since passed on, but who was using her will as a cudgel against her family. And so the family members were in or out, depending on whoever was attempting to curry favor with her at any given point.
Oh.
So, and so and then she passed on, and then it was a whole thing with the niece, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of that, obviously, because I can't. But so some of these high profile, these sexy type of situations, I don't have any personal experience on, so I'm drawing just based on my knowledge and my research and my experience. But I would have to really, like I said, do a deep dive on some of these questions to determine if and when and how these types of scenarios would be remedied.
Right. Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. And of course, I understand as a physician any terms of confidentiality or things like that. But I will say, especially if it's with regards to a will, anything that goes through probate, if it's gone through the legal system, people, just to let you know, it is of public record, depending on what was going on and how things were resolved. So a will is important, advance directive or power of attorney, both financial and medical. They're all very important things that all of us need to do, but also recognize that don't ever do anything that you wouldn't want people to know in general. Because yes, there are plenty of things that could be protected for privacy, but boy, oh boy, the things that you can find online if you know where to check. I'm not saying that like in a duplicitous way. I'm just saying like these things are serious, and basically if you want to make sure that the people you care about are taken care of well, think of it now. Don't think of it when you're sick and wondering what's the next step to do. That's my best thing I can say.
Absolutely. And I say this as someone in my late 30s that I have been strongly encouraging potential clients around my age, our age, Doc, to get an estate plan now. Don't wait until you're older. Because, I mean, certainly it's important when you're older, but in the event that something happens and you get caught off guard, you really want to ensure that you have an estate plan. And so I would encourage anyone, my rule of thumb is always, if you have a spouse or a house, get an estate plan, get a will. Especially if and especially if you have a child. Oh my God, if you have a child, you need to have one.
Oh yeah, because, and I'll say this does directly tie medically too, because let's say we have to make a decision for someone that can't make a decision for themselves. A lot of people say, well, I don't have a plan. I guess we'll figure it out when it happens. Like, no. You do have a plan if you don't have a plan. It's the state's plan. It's our system determining ahead of time what that plan is. In other words, from a medical standpoint, it's next of kin. So in other words, let's say you don't get along with your spouse anymore, but you're still married to them. Guess what? They're making the decision for you. So this is not just a matter of money or I get Anthony's point with legacy, and it is crucial, but this also is potentially day-to-day stuff. And if you don't get something set up for yourself and for the people you care about, the state will. And you want to know how much thought they really give to it? Well, they did initially, but for you personally, not a thing. So that's just, I guess you could say that's our call to action.
Yeah. I always tell people, listen, either you get to dictate what happens to your stuff or the government does. And that tends to be a wake-up call to them, because I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. Nobody really wants to entrust that the government is going to have their individual best interests at heart when divvying up their assets.
Yeah.
Nobody. I don't care. Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, libertarian, capitalist, socialist, doesn't matter. Nobody trusts the government that much. So that's one of the things that I always tell my clients or potential clients.
Yeah. So I think this has been a fascinating dive into the legal system, both from the hypothetical in-universe and the actual information and the wild things that happen out of universe. You know, I really appreciate this, because this is something that I don't usually get to think about. My head is usually way more into the medical and mental health side of things. So I appreciate this wake-up call to my brain.
Well, thank you. And hopefully our listeners enjoy it too. And, sound off. If you enjoyed this, if you want more episodes like this, hopefully we won't wait another 75 episodes before doing another one. If you like it, please feel free to sound off on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, at Capes on the Couch. You can email us, capesonthecouch@gmail.com. We mentioned at the top of the show that we do have a Patreon. We may be pausing collecting payments, but we will still continue to put out the content. We will be doing the trade paperback review for the patrons at the local official level and up. This month it will be Lock and Key, Welcome to Lovecraft, the first 6 issues. Doc and I will be recording that very, very soon. The next episodes, we're going to get back to our typical standard type of episode. So upcoming is Kamala Khan, as requested by Ruby, and then Secret Identities, as requested by Matt, and Shredder from Ninja Turtles, as requested by Brian. So I think that's just about going to wrap it up. Now, I do not have any puns, so I'm not going to end it like Doc does. But
Right.
I don't know if Doc, if you have a pun that you're sitting on.
Actually, no, because you took it very early. I was just going to sing the refrain of Who Lives, Who Dies, Who Tells Your Story, but you already did it. So thanks.
No problem. Anytime. So this has been fun. And just again, a quick reminder to everybody, if you're listening to this, when it's recorded or shortly thereafter, please be safe, be healthy, and make good choices. Wash your hands, maintain social distance, and hopefully we will all get through this. And thank you for listening to us to help take your mind off of some of the stuff outside. And if you have the opportunity, at least maybe take a walk around the block, just go get a little bit of fresh air while you can. So I think that just about does it. So for Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.